you. I am recording now. So it's everyone's option if they want to keep their video on or not. I probably won't have mine on the entire time, just because of bandwidth. So my name is Rebecca Flores Miller, and I work with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we're going to start our full Kelp Working Group meeting number 3 today. And first, let's go ahead and see who we have on. And actually, we'll go ahead, see what time it's 11:03. Okay, we'll go ahead and start by welcoming, we have a guest speaker, Meredith McPherson. And Gina, would you like to introduce Meredith?
Sure. So Meredith is a PhD candidate from UC Santa Cruz, and she studies remote sensing of kelp canopy, among other things. And in a few minutes here, she will discuss some of her really recent research called Large-Scale Shift in the Structure of a Kelp Forest Ecosystem Co-occurs with an Epizootic and Marine Heat Wave.
Great, thank you. And then we will start by introducing folks. Again, my name is Rebecca Flores Miller. I'm with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have a pretty packed agenda today. So thank you all for taking the time to meet with us. So because of that, let's just, when we introduce ourselves, let's just keep our introductions brief to our name and affiliation. So I'll just go ahead and call out folks to introduce themselves. So Kirsten, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten Ramey. I am the program manager for the department's state-managed finfish and nearshore ecosystem program. So kelp falls under my program responsibilities, and I'm located out of the Eureka office.
Great, thank you. And Adam?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Adam Frimidig. I'm the supervisor for the Marine Region's Nearshore and Bay Management Project.
And Gina?
Good morning. My name is Gina Consolini. I am the Kelp Management Extension Fellow, working with California Sea Grant and the Department of Fish and Wildlife to help with kelp management and things like writing the Kelp Enhanced Status Report.
Thank you. And do we have Susan on? Maybe not yet. Susan Ashcroft with the Fish and Game Commission. We'll go back to Susan. Karina, are you on with the Fish and Game Commission?
Hi, yeah, I'm here, and it looks like Susan isn't quite here yet.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Karina Hong. I am the 2021 Sea Grant Fellow with the California Fish and Game Commission.
Thank you. And Doug, would you like to present yourself? Introduce yourself.
Hi, Doug Bush, Cultured Abalone Farm in Santa Barbara, commercial kelp harvester.
Thanks, Doug. And James? I think I saw James earlier. James, if you are on, you may be on mute. Okay, we'll go back to James. Cindy, are you on?
Yeah, hello. Good morning, everybody. My name is Cindy Dawson, and I'm a contractor representing the Pew Charitable Trust Conserving Marine Life in the U.S. program. Thanks.
Thanks, Cindy. Tom? Okay, we'll go. Riata, are you on?
Hi, everyone. This is Riata Holman, and I manage the Kelp Recovery Program, which is a joint initiative between the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary and the Greater Farallones Association.
Thank you. Dr. Kubler? thought maybe she's not on yet. Do we have Susan on the call yet?
No, not yet.
And James, do we have James on the call? Let's see. Yeah, for some reason, I'm not able to see all the participants on my screen. So I don't know if they, oh, there we go. That helps. Yes.
Stop
Dr.
sharing.
Kubler. Thank you. Dr. Kubler, can you introduce
Oh,
yourself?
yes, sorry, I was muted earlier.
No worries.
So I'm Janet Kubler. I'm a marine biologist at Cal State Northridge.
Yeah. And it looks like we may be missing. So the folks we don't have on the call, who confirmed is Tom Ford is not on yet, unless I don't see a call in. And James, were you able to sign on? Do you not have James yet?
I did see James earlier, but I don't see him on the list now.
Okay. Maybe he'll jump back on.
I also think Eliza is on. Is that right?
Hi, I'm here.
Great. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name's Liza Harrison. I work as the Business Development Coordinator for Ocean Rainforest.
Thank you. Glad you can make it. Okay, so I don't know, is there anyone on the call that hasn't introduced themselves? Okay.
Rebecca, it looks like there's someone with the last 4 digits 0769, and maybe they're having problems with mute, because I did see James earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's him. I'm not sure.
No, that's me. I'm
okay.
using my phone for audio. Yeah, it's Kirsten.
Okay. Huh. Okay. So I know James had stated, I mean, obviously we saw him earlier and stated he was going to be present. Tom is expected to sign in as well. But I know he may have some conflicting meetings later on, so he might have to sign out early. And we have Susan who will sign on. So let's go ahead and start. And gosh, I hope James gets on quickly. I'm going to send him a quick email. I'm just going to try to make sure he gets on real quick.
While we're waiting for that, if you have any problems seeing the screen share, please let me know. Sometimes things get really small once I've shared them, and to let me know if I need to make them bigger or anything like that. Also, I don't think I can see the chat while I'm screen sharing. So just know that I won't be able to monitor that. But hopefully Rebecca will.
I will. And I just sent James a quick email just to ask him if he's having any issues to let us know. All right. So thank you. So if you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So we've done our introductions, and now let's talk about some announcements. So if you have not heard already, the Intertribal Sinkyune Wilderness Council recently posted proposed regulation amendments on their news webpage. So we wanted to let you know about that. Internally, the department staff are still reviewing that information the council provided to us. And if you're interested in reading that proposal, please visit their webpage, the council's webpage, to review the amendment request to prepare to discuss during our next working group meeting. And I can, if you don't have that already, I can make sure to send you the link to their page after our call. Does anyone?
Can you summarize it?
Well, I have not read it all, and so I can't fully summarize it. One thing I can tell you is that so they were proposed regulations for commercial harvest. Marine algae. I can't remember if recreational was on there. I mean, one of the proposed amendments would be for pertaining to bull kelp and to have a moratorium on harvest. So, like I said, we haven't had time we're still reviewing it. I have not looked at it in depth. So we're not prepared to discuss it at this time. And then also our agenda is very packed. So we plan on adding that as an agenda item for the next meeting. But we wanted to make you all aware of it. And after our call, I can send the group the link. Oh, looks like Cindy just did. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy just put the link up on the chat, the meeting chat. And I'll also make sure to follow up after our call as well and send it so you can have it in an email as well. Does anyone else have any other announcements they want to share with the group?
Awesome.
It's on.
I think James Youngworth made it on.
Yay. Hey, James.
Hello. Yeah, I got bumped off. I got it fixed now. So good morning, everybody.
No worries. Thank you for joining. Hey, we just barely started. We did introductions. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, my name's James Youngworth, and my wife, Kari, and I started Nature Spirit Herbs, our family business in 1990, and we harvest a variety of edible seaweeds, edible and medicinal seaweeds on mostly in Del Norte and Humboldt counties in the northern corner of California, and we sell them through our mail order business. Happy to be here.
Thanks. And oh wow, I'm getting feedback. I don't know. Okay, perfect. I think it stopped. So has Susan come on yet, or Tom's, before we continue on? If you have.
No, I still don't see her yet.
Perfect. I mean, not perfect, but okay. We will introduce when she comes on or when Tom comes on. All right. So yes, does anyone have any other meeting announcements they would like to share with the group before we move on? Okay. So next on the agenda, we will listen to Meredith discuss her work. And so Meredith, if you could introduce yourself, and then Gina, can you pull up Meredith's slides, or do you want me to do that? Thanks.
Oops, I was on mute. Can you see her slide?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's all you, Meredith.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here today to talk to you all. My name is Meredith McPherson. I'm a PhD student at UC Santa Cruz, like Gina mentioned, and I mostly focus on using remote sensing techniques to monitor and study kelp, and I focus mostly on California so far. So today I'm going to talk about some recent work that we had come out from Northern California, and just to clarify, it's from Sonoma and Mendocino counties specifically, so not all of Northern California. And then after that, I'll discuss some work that I've done on estimating or working towards estimating bull kelp biomass from remote sensing methods. And I just want to say, if anybody has questions in the middle or anything, or something's not clear, then definitely feel free to stop or chat something, or yeah. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I'm okay being interrupted. So next slide, Gina. So I'm not really going to give a big background on sort of the motivation and the impetus for this work in studying large-scale kelp dynamics in Northern California. I'm sure all of you are aware of the kelp decline that Sonoma and Mendocino counties have experienced since 2014. And yeah, so, but because Southern and Central California had been so extensively studied in terms of the long-term drivers of kelp canopy coverage in those areas, we also wanted to go beyond just the most recent event and the most recent loss of kelp, and look across a long-term time series using satellite data. So next slide. So we had 3 research questions. The first was, what are the environmental and biological drivers of Northern California bull kelp across these more than 3 decades? Next, sorry, I shouldn't have put bullets. And how did the 2014 to 2016 marine heat wave and El Nino event influence the bull kelp loss in Northern California? And then how will these drivers, both the environmental and the biological, influence recovery of bull kelp populations? And what can we sort of say at this time, even though conditions are always changing, obviously? Next slide. So I'm just going to briefly talk about some methods in general about remote sensing of kelp and what methods we use specifically for this. There are different types of methods. We used a method similar to what the Santa Barbara Channel LTER group uses. Yeah, and so just let me know later on or interrupt me if you have any questions. So next slide. So kelp is actually relatively easy, easy in quotes, to map compared to other marine and aquatic targets like phytoplankton and things like that. And so the plot on the bottom left just shows basically reflectance of kelp and water. And so I realize this isn't colorblind friendly now that I'm showing it, but the line that is brownish red and is high at 850 nanometer wavelength is the kelp spectra, and the green line, which is lower and towards the bottom, is a spectra of water. So they have a very distinct spectral signature that allows us to be able to see and differentiate between the two relatively easily. And so the image on the right is actually a drone image. It's not a satellite image, but it's displaying the same thing that we kind of see with a satellite image, where all the kelp is bright and has a strong reflectance in this near infrared band relative to the water. So all the water is kind of the green stuff surrounding the patch. And I'm sure all of you guys have seen images of aerial kelp canopy or maybe drone imagery of kelp. So this is this is how we're able to sort of easily map kelp through time. So next slide.
I think I can't click with the laser pointer. So a second. Okay. Do you see it?
Yeah. Great. So we use a spectral unmixing approach, basically. There are different methods to determine kelp canopy coverage, but basically we take the spectra that we get from the remote sensing imagery, and we determine the fraction of kelp and water in each pixel. So this is just 3 examples: 0% kelp, 50% kelp, and 100% kelp. And this slide just kind of shows that the boxes on the left that are 3 distinct colors is what we actually see in each pixel. But we could, it could in reality be like it is on the right side, where half of the pixel is covered in kelp and half of the pixel is not. But we only see it as one color in the pixel. It could also just be that kelp canopy is more dense and thicker at the surface, and so we get a stronger reflectance. So in terms of the fraction, it kind of you can think about it in 2 ways. Either it's the biomass within that pixel, and maybe even kelp health, or its actual coverage within that pixel. So next slide. So using these techniques for measuring and measuring kelp within each pixel, we developed a 30+ year, so it was 34 years of bull kelp canopy area in Sonoma and Mendocino counties. And so the y-axis is latitude, and the heat map shown on the right corresponds to the map that's shown on the left. So basically, we're looking at kelp through time in 90-meter coastline segments, latitudinal segments. And what really stands out in this is obviously the large kelp decline between 2014 and 2019. So we only went out to 2019 for this particular study. But there's some evidence that conditions might have improved a little bit in 2020, but it would still be pretty low even in 2020. And so next slide, Gina. So in addition to just, oops, one more back. Yeah, so in addition to just seeing that decline between 2014 and 2019, we also saw this range narrowing of bull kelp in this region. And so where historically we might have gotten some kelp in the northern and southern areas of Sonoma and Mendocino County, we really only saw it between Jenner and a little bit north of Fort Bragg. And really areas like Point Arena, which had historically been the densest kelp and the largest kelp canopy historically throughout the 34-year time series, we really didn't detect anything there in 2019, and it was very sparse even before that. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of point out some spatial patterns that we can see with this time series. Next slide. So I also mentioned that we wanted to understand what were the drivers of kelp across our time series. And so we used a model to basically determine what were the dominant drivers across this time. So basically kelp is what we're modeling. And then we selected drivers of kelp. And I kind of, this like a little bit of a complicated table, but I want to point out that the kelp time series, what we're calling our large scale drivers and our local scale drivers, we have for the entire time series. So from nearly the entire time series, 1985 to 2018. But for the biological data, we only have it from 2007 to 2018. So we have a little bit different temporal length for these different drivers that we're looking at, but I think we still were able to understand things, patterns and things that had occurred through time with the biological data, even though we don't have it back to 1985. So for the large scale and local scale drivers, the large scale drivers are generally indices that are oceanographic indices that we, as oceanographers, use to basically say, okay, this is fluctuating and could be influencing temperature nutrient dynamics. So because we're in an we are studying kelp in an upwelling system, a lot of these oceanographic large-scale drivers influence temperature nutrient conditions, and that will influence kelp canopy cover. And in addition to that, we could look specifically at the local scale drivers, which were temperature, nutrients, specifically nitrogen, nitrate, and wave height. And then for the biological data, we really focused on urchins. Whoops, Gina disappeared.
Oh, sorry. You're back.
Yeah, back. We looked at specifically urchin density. We didn't include Pycnopodia or sunflower stars in our model just because sort of that one-step removal of the predator-prey interaction didn't seem to really fit well into the model. And so we focused specifically on what directly impacts kelp, and that's the urchin density. Okay, next slide. So I just want to talk about brief take-homes and results that we got from this analysis. Next slide. Next slide, Gina.
So mine is showing the graph. Are you not seeing the graph?
No.
I'm seeing the graph.
Oh, you are? Okay, maybe it's me. Okay. So the first thing that we wanted to show as a take home was that kelp was actually historically resilient to extreme physical perturbations. So just to orient you to the plot, we have our time on the x-axis. Oops, disappeared again.
Oh, now it's gone. Looks like someone else has started sharing. Oh, I think James Youngward has started sharing.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to fiddle with my controls here. I did something wrong.
Okay, yeah, I think you are sharing your screen, which just looks white right now. But I will try to reshare mine. Did it come back?
That's good.
Yes, I see it again.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So we have time on the x-axis, and bull kelp is in green. The number of marine heat wave days, which is just one of the temperature parameters that we used, is in orange. Purple is the purple urchin density, and sunflower star is in pink. So those two are bars. So our environmental parameters are in the lines and our biological are the bars. So in 1997, 1998, we had a large El Nino, and we had a very strong temperature response. And even though it wasn't as long-lived as the marine heat wave that we had in 2014 to 2016, it was still very strong. And actually, we saw that kelp rebounded very quickly and returned to its sort of normal dynamic state after that. And which was very different than what we saw between 2014 and 2020, which is that basically temperatures rose. There was also a biological biological response, and kelp decline happened in a stepwise fashion and has remained close to historical minimums since then. Okay, next slide.
Has it changed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So the second is that the lack of the predator diversity reduced ecosystem resilience. And so even though kelp had historically been resilient in the past, and there perhaps are some other urchin dynamics going on that didn't occur in the past. We didn't see declines. Sunflower stars were present and probably grazing on urchins, and the lack of sea otters within the system didn't really impact it. But once there was a really large stressor put on the system, in addition to the loss of the sunflower stars due to sea star wasting disease, the ecosystem resilience was basically non-existent, and so kelp really was impacted by those dynamics. Okay, next slide. Oh, and actually forgot to say. So the plots in the middle are basically just sunflower star and purple urchin, and we had begun to see a decline in sunflower stars prior to sea star wasting disease. And so it's difficult to say whether that had anything to do with the loss of kelp, but we do see this decline prior, and so that's an interesting observation that we made, but we couldn't really link it specifically to the kelp loss in Northern California. Okay, next slide. And the last is that obviously the predator-prey dynamics are important, but really temperature nutrient conditions need to be ideal in Northern California in order for recovery to happen also. So the green bars are kelp, our kelp index, our kelp canopy through time, corresponding to the x-axis. And the black line is actually the model. So this is from what I was talking about earlier, where we modeled kelp based on environmental and biological. And the left side is just environmental drivers. So this doesn't include urchins at all. And the right side includes both environmental and biological, which is also why the model is shorter, because we only had biological data from 2007. So if we look at the left-hand side, we see that basically the model is doing pretty well along with what the actual fluctuations in kelp are. It's not perfect, obviously, and it really only explained about 30% of the variability in kelp. But when we forecasted kelp, which is the dashed black line, we saw that there was a slight recovery, but it wasn't back to what we had seen historically, like 2008, 2012. Those were really good kelp years on the North Coast. And so temperature and nutrient conditions had not really returned to ideal conditions. And so that is going to limit recovery of kelp, regardless of whether there are no urchins or there are urchins. And then on the right side, the modeled forecast shows also that we don't see as strong of a recovery or a bounce back as we do with just the environmental data. And so it's suppressing that recovery even more. And this model explained about 50% of the variability in the actual kelp canopy dynamics. So it's really a combination of the two, and it's not just one or the other, which is, I think, important when we consider restoration strategies. Okay, next slide. Oh, I also realized those were ordered wrong, but those are the three main take-homes. And so we also provide some management recommendations and just in terms of, thinking about restoration. And so the first is that prioritizing time series measurements of not just remote sensing, because that doesn't tell us the whole picture, obviously, but also of in situ data. If we had had in situ data back to 1985, I think we could have learned a lot more. And or at least haven't had a broader context of what was occurring back as far as we have a historical record of kelp. And so these are important just for quantifying historical baseline, setting thresholds for monitoring criteria, developing restoration targets, and then tracking recovery, which is really important right now, since we've already had this ecosystem collapse. We want to kind of spatially be able to see how recovery is happening, in terms of remote sensing, but what is the recovery of other important biological features of the ecosystem. So the second recommendation is that also developing environmental forecasting models, and this can help determine if current and future environmental and biological conditions are impeding kelp recovery. And how likely is a recovered kelp forest, how likely is it to persist based on different or forecasted environmental conditions? Okay, next slide. So that was basically all I was going to talk about for the Northern California time series that we developed. And so now I'm going to transition into talking about bull kelp canopy biomass, which I know, or I've heard you guys are having some conversations about this within the working group. And so I have been working towards using remote sensing techniques to determine bull kelp canopy biomass, which is definitely lacking piece of information for bull kelp. So just going to talk about that for the next little bit. Okay, so basically our study motivation revolves around a couple key things. The first is that carbon sequestration calculations and just wanting to understand what the role of kelp is in carbon sequestration globally has kind of come to the forefront as climate change impacts increase, and we are trying to come up with mitigation strategies, and California is really interested in blue carbon. So in order to do that, we need accurate estimates, or we need an understanding of what kelp biomass is. It can also be used to estimate net primary productivity, which is important for just understanding rates of productivity in systems and, spatial and temporal dynamics and things like that. And then also just resource managers understanding the actual amount of biomass that is being harvested from kelp forests. Okay, next. And obviously, I mentioned this already, but bull kelp data for bull kelp is greatly lacking. And so the plot on the right is actually for giant kelp. And so again, from the Santa Barbara Coastal LTER data set. And so on the y-axis, there's diver kelp canopy biomass. So that's basically fresh kilograms per meter squared. That's the biomass compared to the satellite-derived kelp canopy fraction. So similar, same method that we're using for the time series approach. But now we're doing basically comparisons of in situ diver biomass to a satellite measurement from space. And so each of the points on this plot represent a different day and a couple of different sites that the LTER group has been measuring for almost 13 years or more. So this is a long-term data set, and they've developed a pretty robust relationship between the satellite-derived canopy fraction and the diver canopy biomass. And so I wanted to see if we could do something similar to this for bull kelp. So next slide. Next slide.
Is it showing you study design?
Maybe I have a little bit of a lag. It hasn't switched for me.
Yeah.
Okay, I have the study design slide up.
Okay, yeah, now I see it. So because there is no long-term data set for bull kelp, and I am a graduate student with limited resources, I developed a different type of approach where we surveyed several sites in Mendocino and Monterey counties. And I'm just going to focus on bull kelp. I did the same thing for some giant kelp sites, but we're talking about bull kelp here and interested in that. So, I'm focusing on two sites, Portuguese Beach in Mendocino and Point Pinos in Monterey. And I only surveyed these sites once. And then at the same time at each site, I flew our drone with a multispectral camera to get the remote sensing data. And in addition to that, measured so the dive survey was in situ surveys of site count, and we also measured plant biomass and morphology of kelp at all the sites, and then conducted a matchup analysis similar to what the Santa Barbara Channel group does. And so in remote sensing, a matchup analysis is basically, you know, the latitude and longitude of where you took your measurements in situ, and you compare that to the geographical location that matches up with that dive survey in the imagery. And then in addition to just doing the matchups, we wanted to look at different pixel resolutions because there are several different satellites and sensors available where if we can develop a robust relationship between the biomass and the kelp fraction, then we can derive it from multiple different sensors. So next slide. Okay, so the image in the middle of the slide is just showing what our dive surveys looked like. So we used a 60 by 60 meter plot and a bicycle spoke configuration for our dive surveys. Each of the orange points indicates the center of a 5 meter long section of the transect. And then we did it in this case at Portuguese Beach and Point Pinos. And underneath the orange points is just the UAV imagery at 10 centimeter resolution, just so you can see what that kelp patch looked like relative to what the bicycle spoke configuration is. So basically the first step was to get the diver site counts, and then we at the bottom, and then we could use relationships between the morphology of the plants and the stipe counts in order to get to a surface canopy biomass measurement for that section of the transect. And then step two was to use that canopy biomass and then conduct the matchup analysis to the kelp canopy fraction. So I'm going to show some plots of those matchup analyses on the next slide.
Right.
There we go. I see it.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. So results and take homes. Next slide.
Tell me if I'm on the right one.
Okay. Yeah, you're good. Okay. So the first thing that we learned basically was that site variability really challenged our ability to consistently predict canopy biomass. So Portuguese Beach was an example of where these matchups worked. So on the top, the images on the top are some of the different resolutions that we used, 10 centimeters all the way to 10 meters. And then the scatter plots on the second row correspond in resolution to those images. And as you can see, we get good matchup. There's some scatter. So on the x-axis, we have the UAV-derived kelp canopy fraction, basically from 0 to 1. It's not super important, the actual canopy fraction values. And then on the y-axis, we have kelp canopy biomass measured in situ. And so we got a significant and a strong relationship between the two. And it didn't matter what resolution we used. It worked across all four. Next slide. And then
Could I ask a quick question? What was your R values for the best performance in the previous slide?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I can check for you right at the end though.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you were around 60.6.
Yeah, ballpark's fine. Great, yeah. Thanks.
So, and then for Point Pinos in Monterey, which has a totally different site characteristic, as you can see from the images on the top row, the canopy patterns are just very different. The kelp is dispersed, totally different. And we got bad matchups between kelp canopy fraction, which is on the X again, and canopy biomass on the Y. And so basically and we saw this across all of the sites we did beyond just these two, and for both giant kelp and bull kelp sites. So it wasn't just that bull kelp was harder or giant kelp was easier. It was just that each patch was so different, and this one particular snapshot in time made it difficult to conduct a matchup analysis. Okay, so next slide. Yeah, so basically, one of the main findings is that, or take homes, is that these long-term study designs are actually really important. You can't just go out once or twice and do this. It needs to be an investment in order to understand what these relationships are between canopy biomass and kelp fraction, in order to sort of not tease out, in order to basically let the temporal and spatial variability of that kelp bed, sorry, I'm trying to explain, basically, doesn't influence the relationship as strongly as it does just for the fine scale matchups that we did at one particular time. Okay, next slide. Sorry.
My slide says management recommendations.
Okay, so. Yeah, now I see it.
Okay.
So the recommendations from the study that we present are that, first, I think it's really important to determine priorities for management. Canopy area is a great tool and has been used for a really long time in order to, as a monitoring strategy. And the advent of biomass from the Santa Barbara Channel LTER group really kind of brought into light what it can potentially be used for, but canopy area is also a really great tool. And also determine the feasibility of a long-term study design like the one that the LTER group uses. and then determine what the management questions are. And so, for example, for carbon sequestration potential, perhaps rough estimates of biomass for bulk kelp can be made now and used in order to just sort of understand orders of magnitudes of biomass that contribute to carbon sequestration or not, rather than waiting for perfectly developed relationships. And you know, if that isn't good enough in the long term, then perhaps monitoring long term should also be prioritized, or, you know, developing these relationships and developing long-term monitoring at specific sites should be prioritized. Okay, next slide. And that's it. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer or clarify. So thank you again.
Meredith, this is Doug.
Hi.
Hi. Do you have any, so in light of your statement that, you know, while we're waiting on the development of a more tightly correlated, you know, set of values, do you have any sort of cocktail napkin coefficient ranges? You know, I looking at that giant kelp graph that you threw up, it looked like 2 to 8 kilograms per meter squared was a reasonable working range, just within the range of sort of pixelated resolution that you found with the satellite and drone imagery. Do you have a very loose sort of range of coefficients for biomass?
Yeah, so actually Rieta and I have been working together on, and Sarah Hutto, on sort of these back of the envelope calculations for biomass, which I think Sarah is planning to include in the blue carbon report. Rieta, I don't know if I have the name exactly correct, but yeah, so we kind of created this in-member model where we basically defined a minimum and a maximum kelp canopy fraction that we would get from Landsat, and a minimum and a maximum kelp canopy biomass that we've observed, mostly based on Reef Check, actually, because they have historical stipe counts. And so we have been able to develop a back of the envelope calculation linear relationship between the two that Sarah, I think, is planning to include in the report. And I can't remember the values off the top of my head. Probably should have included it in the presentation.
This is Janet Kubler. I have a question.
Hi, Janet. How are you?
Good. Thanks. That was so interesting.
Thank you.
I have a question about your model. Does it include lag effects or any iterative effects, like from year to year?
Yeah, so it doesn't. And we looked into some lag effects prior to, you know, finalizing the model. And actually it wasn't as strong as what they have seen for giant kelp. And so we ended up not using any lags.
Okay. I was wondering that, just because it's an annual, right? That it might separate for that reason, but
yeah.
Thanks for
and then what I kind of wonder if it's maybe just also in turn, like for the patchiness, you know, or because it is an annual, it's a little bit more dynamic than giant kelp, and so those lags aren't as strong as they are with giant kelp.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
I think we have some hands up. Rebecca, are you monitoring that as well?
Yeah, sorry, I was taking some notes. It looks like I see Cindy's hand is up.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Meredith. I'm really happy to see that, or hear that you've been connected to the Reef Check data, because there's actually some sites that we were doing twice a year. So as far as tuning that model, it may be really beneficial. Another data source that goes back to the early 2000s or even the late 90s is the CDF and W abalone data. We were taking stipe counts and urchin counts as well. So I don't know if you've talked to Laura Rogers-Bennett about getting that data.
Oh, I haven't. I work with Laura quite a bit, and actually wasn't aware that they were doing stipe counts. So I will definitely get in touch with her, because I started working with them when there was no kelp. So I think we're focused a lot on counting urchins and things like that. So that's a
yeah. It was a long time ago, but I could be wrong. But I feel like when we were diving in the early 2000s, we were counting kelp
doing
too.
Doing still
so
counts.
I can't counting stipes, but that could be wrong. But you should double check with her.
I will.
And then I did. Yeah.
I was just going to say that there's so little data for stipe counts in the area. So yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. And I mean, when we were started in Reef Check in 2006, I think we only had 3 sites, and those were in like 2 in Sonoma and 2 in Mendocino, and then it expanded. So that's cool that you're using that data. I was wondering if you could just talk to the group a little bit about, you know, in your paper, the time series graph with kind of the heat map. One of the things that really stood out to me is, you know, you brought up Point Arena. So if you look at this time series, and you showed it several different ways, that, you know, we've had extreme events before, but we haven't seen this persistence of the decline and lack of recovery. And in some areas, it still seems to be going the wrong way. Like the Point Arena, you know, it seems to be getting worse because of all the drivers that you've mentioned. I'm just wondering if you could talk to people a little bit about, just in your particular research and just your understanding of kelp globally, you know, kind of how this kind of collapse and then lack of recovery, how we might think about responding to that related to harvest, or just talk a little bit about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't know that much about harvesting. And I was talking to Gina before the meeting started, sort of to get an understanding of what the historical and current harvesting situation is in Northern California. I think the really the difference between Northern California and other areas that have gotten a lot of attention, like Alaska and Monterey, is just sort of the widespread nature of the collapse. And there are definitely other areas of the world that have experienced similar, you know, large scale. So like Norway has been dealing with urchin barrens since the 60s and 70s, and with little recovery since then. And also in Australia and Tasmania, they've had pretty large scale urchin barrens kind of arise over time. And I think in terms of harvesting and not knowing the scale at which these, what the scale that harvesting happens in Northern California, I think for bull kelp, you know, it does seem concerning to me to do any kind of commercial harvesting in Northern California right now, just because how little kelp there is, and the fact that bull kelp is an annual. So, and then in Monterey, I know there are several, in Monterey and Santa Cruz, there are several abalone farms that harvest in the area, but obviously bull kelp is not the predominant species down there. And so they're taking probably both giant and bull kelp, and people on the call, I'm sure, know much more about this than I do, but it would definitely concern me if commercial harvesting was being done in Northern California, just because the patches that I've seen, it's like, you know, a harvester is going to need all of that for an abalone farm, or, you know, large scale harvesting. A patch could be basically decimated in a very short amount of time. So I don't know if that answers your question. And I don't really have a good understanding of what kind of harvesting regulations are going on in Norway and Tasmania, for example. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's just a, you know, as we're having these discussions, the way that I'm thinking about it is at this point, every spore matters. Every spore in the water matters.
Right.
And so even small scale harvest, you know, it seems like we need to think really hard about it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think I saw Tom Ford's hand up. Gina, can you stop sharing your screen? Oh, thank you, because then I can see hands up better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see James and Tom Ford with the hand up.
Okay.
I haven't heard from Tom.
Yeah.
Maybe we can move on to James and come back to Tom.
He's got his camera on.
Oh,
Great. Okay, James.
Oh, hello. Yeah, this is James, and just wanted to thank you for your presentation. There was a lot of really helpful information, and basically, let's see. So, just wanted to let you know, Meredith, that we're going to hopefully have time to give a presentation of what you know, harvest levels and so on. But over the last 5 or 10 years, the average amount of bull kelp harvested in Mendocino and Sonoma has been like a maximum of like 1 to 2 tons total for both counties.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you a little perspective of the scale of harvest of the edible seaweed. Anyway, I just wanted to put that on the table.
Yeah, thanks.
And so I had some other questions regarding the public perceptions of the survey, the study that you did, because I know it attracted a lot of attention in the news,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like a lot of that got misconstrued as far as like first of all, the 95% loss seems to have been like measured using 2008 data as a baseline, and 2008 was like an anomalously high canopy cover area year. I was wondering why was that used as a baseline?
So yeah, I think it was kind of hard to communicate in the press releases because we had to pick particular images, and in hindsight, I wish I had given them an image which was the average kelp canopy coverage across 1985 to 2013, but I showed a snapshot of 2008. So actually, the 95% is the average prior to the marine heat wave in 2014. So that calculation is for the averages before and after, and not just for 2008 to 2019. Yeah. So
okay,
that was my newbie mistake in terms of how to communicate with the media.
Sure. Well, you know, we're kind of sensitive to that as harvesters, you know, because it's kind of and then everybody seems to be repeating that, and so it's kind of hard to bring it back to something realistic, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, the 95% is the averages, though, so that is the right number, and yeah.
Okay, and and if I understood it correctly, the canopy data from Humboldt or Del Norte counties was not included in this study. Is that correct?
Right. We just focused on Mendocino and Sonoma.
Okay, because the data, at least the charts, my own observations and the charts from Fish and Wildlife show that, well, since 2014, have actually the 2014 to 2020, whatever, were actually overall pretty better years than the 10 years before 2014.
Yeah, and they've seen similar things in Oregon also.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm just also just wanted to correct the record, because everybody's talking about this 95% decline as being in all of Northern California. Well, I harvest up in Del Norte and Mendocino and Del Norte and Humboldt, and I kind of feel like, well, that's not at all what's happening up where I am. And it's being portrayed as if there's no kelp where I am, and that's just not at all the case.
Yeah, that's understandable. And I think there definitely has been some confusion. I wish I could go back and just include the rest of Northern California, so that then there would be some context, to not make it seem like, the entire Northern California coastline has experienced a 95% reduction. And obviously there are things, once you get north of Mendocino County, the substrates are different, like the dynamics are a little bit different. And we don't really understand why Oregon and Northern California didn't experience a similar level of decline that Sonoma and Mendocino County did. So I think in terms of within my community, we are starting to sort of like focus in on trying to figure out why that is, and hopefully something can come out soon in order to help everybody understand more about these within region dynamics of kelp. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah. Thanks for your comments.
And I thought I would try one more time. I think Tom may not be on, but I thought I'd check, since it does look like there's still a hand up.
I'm still here. I hope people can hear me.
Yes, we can. Hi, Tom.
All right. Hello, Rebecca. Thank you. And thank you, Meredith. I enjoyed that presentation.
Thank you.
So I'm in full agreement that long-term monitoring is really one of the few opportunities that we have to reliably assess the trends that are manifesting off of our coast. And I caught the same function, and I'm sorry I came in too late to maybe miss your primer on Point Arena, but I could see the density there. So it seems like that would be a place that would be a priority for monitoring because of how it historically performed. Obviously, there's places that are going to be of interest to harvesters that might not correlate with those perhaps ecological standouts. Just asking for maybe that back of the envelope question of do you think that the data, the time series data that you've collected, could help us identify good priority spots for sort of the ecological cultural interests, as well as the socioeconomic side of this, so that we can start to set up a network of monitoring with those limited precious resources, which I know you function under, and unfortunately I think we often find all of ourselves functioning under.
Yeah, I think the Landsat time series, which is a 30-meter pixel resolution, is really, really great for looking at historical context and sort of where regions of the coastline have had, cultural and ecological importance. Right. And so in order of determining like those larger portions of the coastline, yeah, but it is really hard with Landsat to get down to even the nittier grittier, where exactly at Point Arena is there kelp now? And so different types of methods are starting to be sort of focusing in on that. And basically we just need a higher resolution sensors. There's been, drone surveys that are going on the North Coast to get an idea of much more localized hotspots of kelp and things like that, and persisting patches of kelp. Other satellites like Planet, which have a 3-meter pixel resolution, are potentially really great for that too. So, but Landsat, the value of Landsat is that we have no other satellite that goes back to 1985. And so it just provides that context that no other satellite can provide. And trends, what are the trends in kelp? So it's not perfect at seeing every tiny piece of kelp patch, but it is really great for seeing trends in kelp. And so, yeah, I definitely think prioritizing these time series and then also prioritizing using other sensors to sort of bring into the Landsat time series are really important.
Thank you for that. And I certainly don't want to draw the focus off of bull kelp, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But this is that reminder, like, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
Right.
So we've got, these other areas, be they bull kelp dominated forests or giant kelp dominated forests, all probably deserving of this same sort of degree of attention. I know that it's high priority for a lot of folks to do so.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of that environmental data just reminded me of Matt Edwards' work, like in 2004, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like so much of that correlated to Mike Foster as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that when we spin this up and we look at what we're trying to do for bull kelp, that we're also paying attention to the entirety of these kelp forests up and down the coast. Certainly, there's some biological connectivity across both systems.
Yeah, and I think in Northern California, even though this was, not great for Sonoma and Mendocino County and the fisheries and the cultural aspect and everything, there has been a huge ramp up in the in situ monitoring that was so lacking, and hopefully, and I've seen increases into Del Norte and Humboldt counties too, and so it seems like people are realizing that these time series are really valuable and will start to focus on regions which haven't historically been sampled. So yeah.
Thank you, Meredith. And then the last thing I've got to say, and Cindy, this is, I appreciate what you placed in the chat about, we're focusing on the 2 counties here. So I'm assuming that when you've said, Cindy, that it's, every spore in the water counts, that you're referring to Sonoma and Mendocino counties and not necessarily what we're seeing off of Del Norte and Humboldt. So
yeah.
Just wanted to.
Yeah, and I tried to, bring that in at the very beginning, but yeah, I realized that, the study doesn't represent all of Northern California. It's just the 2 counties that experience the most dramatic declines.
Yeah, no, not a problem, Meredith. I don't think you needed to explain that away. I spend my time like fighting for Palos Verdes, so my scale's even smaller. Smaller. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So I don't see any other hands up. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments for Meredith?
This is Janet. I have one more question.
Okay.
And that's going back to your time series. There's that shorter period in the early mid 2000s where there's a lot of kelp decline. Would you say that and it doesn't seem to be correlated with the urchins in exactly the same way as the current time?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that was due to the temperature, or what was the main driver of that period?
I'm just looking at it on my screen here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually know. It doesn't seem to be linked to the biology, like you said, and temperatures actually appear relatively low. So I'd have to go back into maybe the time series of other like oceanographic drivers, like the NPGO index or PDO, and see if maybe there was something specifically during that time. But yeah, it is interesting that it's sort of like along the same time period that we have now seen the decline.
Yeah, it's shorter than now, but it's, yeah, that's what I was wondering but Yeah, that's a, like a separate question maybe.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm curious.
Yeah, so probably there's something, at least, you know, whatever the best predictor is in the model.
Yeah, and definitely NPGO
Okay.
is a very strong driver of kelp in Northern California. And I don't show it in any of these plots or even in the paper really, but it's pretty strongly correlated. So it could be that NPGO was in the negative phase, and just that because the biology hadn't been impacted, that the system was able to survive and bounce back quickly.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks like James has his hand raised. I don't know if that's new, James, or.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, Janet, for asking that, because I was wondering the same thing. That's all.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'll go look at it. I'm actually curious, so I'll go look at it afterwards, and I can email Gina and Rebecca, tell you if I see anything.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, it looks like I don't see any hands up, and no one is speaking as far as having any further comments. So I think let's go ahead and stop the conversation for now on Meredith's presentation. So Meredith, thank you so much. That was hugely informative. It was.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So
Yes, thank you.
It was great to talk to you guys. And I might stick around for a little longer if you guys don't mind, just to listen.
Yes, you're welcome to stay as long as you would like. I think now it's 12:19, so I think I'm ready for a little bit of a break. So let's go ahead and just take a break until 12:30, and then we'll come back on. We still have quite a bit to discuss. We have the department's proposed approach, and then we also have the harvesters that are on the call. James and Doug want to present some recommendations and some feedback from their end. So yeah, let's all, if you can, we'll just continue our discussion at 12:30. So you can stay on and just mute yourselves, and we'll all be back at 12:30. So thank you. And I will continue recording. I'm not going to stop the recording. I'm just going to let it go. Okay, folks, it's 12:30, so I'll start in just a minute. Make sure that Gina is on.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, great.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you. So, now if you can you go to the next slide, please, Gina?
I think that's right.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay.
So we wanted to now talk about the department's proposed regional approach before we start talking about the status of bull kelp harvested for edible seaweed. So this proposed regional approach is not anything that's different from what we discussed previously. So I'll just go through it pretty quickly. So the proposed changes are based on the current status of bull kelp using satellite imagery data, as we discussed during our last meeting. So as a reminder, the satellite imagery data that is available does not currently distinguish between giant and bull kelp. So we cannot use the data set south of San Francisco to determine the status of bull kelp where the two species coexist. So the proposed changes would have a sunset date of potentially 3 to 5 years, or until the kelp restoration and management plan has been completed. We do have a dedicated staff member who's leading that management plan effort. So based on the best available data for the proposed changes, we are proposing to prohibit all bull kelp harvest in Mendocino and Sonoma counties, regardless of intended use. So this is a precautionary approach due to the significant declines in bull kelp in these two counties, and propose prohibiting bull kelp harvest in Marin County. So this is because we are concerned about a harvest shift to a historically low kelp canopy area. The departments, when the department was flying aerial kelp surveys, some kelp was found in Marin County. However, none of that is detected in the satellite imagery data set. So there's a difference in the spatial resolution. So, but the kelp that has been detected using the department aerial kelp surveys, it was a very, historically, it's a low kelp county. So can you go on to the next slide, please? So also proposed to limit the number of bull kelp harvesters in Del Norte and Humboldt counties to the two existing companies that harvest in these two counties, and maintain the current harvest limit of 2 tons wet weight per year for each license holder and the use for human food only. And also impose a hiatus on accepting new kelp bed lease applications for those 3 lease-only beds in Mendocino, Humboldt, and Del Norte counties. So this would be an administrative change. It wouldn't be a regulatory change. So these are the same proposed regional approach that we discussed previously. Does anyone have any questions on this before we move on to the data?
Rebecca, this is Doug. I have comments, but I'll save it for when I speak later.
Okay. Does anyone else have any information or any questions or comments they want to on the proposed regional approach before we move on to the data? Okay. All right. So now, Gina, would you like to lead the discussion on the data you've compiled?
Sure. Let me just get my notes up. I'm just going to stop sharing for just a second. It'll be right back. I think my notes are on the wrong screen.
Do you want me to share the screen for you as far as presentation?
Oh, yeah, if you could, that would probably be really helpful.
I will attempt that.
Okay. Looks like my notes mysteriously closed, so I have to open them. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Let's see. Hey, folks, you should be seeing proposed regional approach, commercial bull kelp harvest north of San Francisco, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
If you could make it bigger, that'd be like full screen, that'd be great. There, thank you.
It's going bigger. Okay. And
I'm not good. Okay, so these are, I believe we have shown these at prior meetings. This is showing kelp canopy maximum in Central and Southern California. And let me just get back to my notes. They've disappeared again. Okay, I'm ready. Oops, we can see that. There you go. Thank you. So this is using the same sort of data set that Meredith showed. So it's our best available data for kelp canopy area. Let's see, the imagery, as we've mentioned, is a 30-meter spatial resolution, so it does not distinguish between the two species of kelp at this time. So these are just showing both of those species together. To remind you, the data is collected quarterly, and we've presented the maximum quarter kelp canopy for each year in square kilometers, and that is on the y-axis, and the year over time is on the x-axis. So this is just maximum annual kelp canopy area. And we've included the asterisk over the year 2020 because data is not available at this time for the last quarter of 2020. So we just have the first 3 quarters there. But in my personal communications with the managers of this data set, that the next update for this data set should, that includes the last quarter, should be available in the next month or so. Okay, so these, we do wanted to mention that while these are this is the same information we've shown you before, there was a conversion error with the canopy area, and so I just wanted to mention that. So the square kilometers, I think it was accidentally presented in meters and it was labeled wrong, but we have worked that out with the folks doing the data set and corrected that conversion error. So the trend, the line is going to be exactly the same, but the y-axis has a different maximum value. So here we're showing Central Coast, which is defined as from San Francisco to Point Conception, and South Coast, which is Point Conception to Mexico, including the Channel Islands. And within both regions, you can see there's a lot of fluctuation in the canopy maximum over the years. You'll notice that the scale, the maximum, is much greater for Central and South than it is for the North Coast, which, Rebecca, if you can move to the next slide, that'll show the North Coast canopy maximum over time. So the maximum here is about an order of magnitude less. Whoops. So in this figure, we've defined the North Coast as San Francisco Bay to the Oregon-California border. And although the satellite imagery can't differentiate between the two species, this area we know is majority bull kelp. There's very little giant kelp in this coast, so this is virtually just showing all bull kelp. So as we've discussed previously, you can see the natural fluctuations in bull kelp over the years. And then there's a drop in 2014 to the present, which hasn't changed. We haven't seen any recovery since then. And this is exactly what Meredith was showing on that same sort of drop in 2014. Okay. I think that's all I had for that plot. And again, the asterisk is just indicating that we don't have the last quarter of 2020. So you should have seen all these before, just sort of a review. Oh, you can move on to the next one. Thank you. So now we're breaking it down by counties. So starting in the north. So these graphs are the same, but just for Del Norte and Humboldt counties. And you'll note that the scale on the y-axis is changed to reflect that. So it's smaller area, so that y-axis scale is smaller, going to maximum of 0.008 kilometers. And so these also depict variability over time. Looking at recent years, just comparing what we have for 2020 to 2019, it looks like in Del Norte, it has declined, but again, we don't have that last quarter, although bull kelp is annual and might not be as likely to be at its maximum in the winter. But so it looks like it's probably declined in 2020 for Del Norte, but that doesn't look like the case in Humboldt County. So that was interesting that that is a difference for this last year. I also wanted to just point out that we know that the heat wave and that big El Nino was from 2014 to 2016, but according to the satellite data in 2016, these counties didn't show a decline. They show like kind of a really high year in 2016. So I thought that was an interesting trend that was different from Mendocino and Sonoma counties. And you can move to the next slide, Rebecca. So here we have Sonoma and Mendocino counties, and the scale on the y-axis is much greater, going up to 3 kilometers squared for Mendocino and 1 for Sonoma. So here we see that dramatic reduction in 2014 that we see we saw in Meredith's analysis and overall for the North Coast. And it has stayed low. One thing we do want to mention that's been an update since the last time is that in our personal communications with the managers of this data set, we were able to receive an update from the last quarter of 2020 for a portion of Sonoma and Mendocino counties, and it did not show an increase in canopy area. It looked pretty much just like what you're seeing here. And that was just from Point Arena to Jenner, so mostly Sonoma County, but it didn't look like it was increasing very much at all in 2020. And I think that is it for the canopy area graphs. So we wanted to just pause here and ask for questions and comments. I see James has a hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself, James?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just gonna say that in Del Norte County, I have personally observed a significant increase in 2020 in the kelp canopy up in that area. I have not observed Humboldt. I haven't been down there this last season, but the maximum canopy up in our area tends to be maximum in the winter. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the winter data.
Yeah, they didn't have it for up north yet. They just showed us some Sonoma Mendocino area.
Yeah, and then I was also going to ask. I also had read in the interim kelp report, or the interim kelp with James and Mark Escrow, said that some people had observed some increase in bull kelp down in Mendocino, Sonoma with some drone capture, and said that one of the sources for that info was Rietta Holman, and I was just wondering if she could say anything about that. That's
fine. Rietta, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Could you repeat the question? And I'm happy to address it.
Yes. in the interim kelp report from Mark Escrow, James Ray mentioned that you and some other people had done some drone surveys in Sonoma Mendocino and saw some level of increase in bull kelp in 2020.
Yeah, so we conducted a comprehensive assessment of all the kelp recovery sites that are in our kelp recovery plan in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And those data are still being processed. So it takes a very long time to stitch all of the drone imagery and then classify kelp cover and then assess the actual kelp percent cover within those images. So we are still working on it, and we don't actually have the final data set, but we're estimating we'll have it hopefully by the end of this month. But there was at some of the sites that we surveyed, not all sites, but there was a noticeable amount of more kelp than there was in the previous year when we also did surveys. However, this is really largely anecdotal. And so there isn't, because we haven't assessed the full data set, I would caution against saying that there was any significant amount of recovery. And if there was, then it really generally is only a fraction of historical kelp cover at those sites. So we are starting this analysis, but I wouldn't say that there's any definitive results yet. But there, at some sites, there was more kelp than the previous year. So that's what I can contribute.
Okay, thank you. I was just also have other harvesters down that way have also reported the same. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like we have a couple of hands raised. Cindy?
Yeah, thanks. This is just a question for James if he feels comfortable answering it, and obviously totally fine if he doesn't. I'm just curious, James, on an average year, spatially, kind of like how many sites do you go to within Del Norte? Do you have like 2 or 3 sites or 5 or 6 sites? Just curious if you feel comfortable sharing that.
Within Del Norte County, there's basically it's all within all the kelps in bed 312 basically, and it's almost all within the area, an area of that bed, and it's all can be observed from with binoculars from shore, and I monitor the entire area.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I kind of thought so. I mean, I've spent a lot of time up there and spent a couple seasons working the rivers up there, and it's always kind of in the same place, and it's very, squished in that 312 bed. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it looks like Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca, I'm not sure if you're operating Gina's share or not. I got the values down for Humboldt, but I failed to get the most recent value area-wise for Del Norte. If we could just get me back up there. Okay. That helps. That helps. Thank you.
And I also did share this presentation with the group.
Gotcha.
Via email, so you will have that.
Okay, thank you again.
No problem. Are there any other questions before we move on? Trying to be looking at the time and be considerate of that, because we do still want to make time for the harvesters to discuss their presentations. Okay. All right. Gina, do you want to tackle the next section, or do you want me to, or we can do it together, or?
I can start it off, and then feel free to add anything or correct me if I misspeak. We can do that way.
Okay. Do you want to start sharing your screen now, or or you can just give me a minute and let me open up some notes. So let me just stop for just one minute.
Yeah, I don't have my presentation up.
No worries. Let me just stop sharing for just a second.
Okay, I think I can present it now, Rebecca, if you want me to do that. Actually, I lost the share screen button. Current slide. Screen 2. Am I muted? Can folks hear me?
We can hear you, but
Okay.
and you have the presentation up, so you're on % bulk kelp harvest side. We can see that.
Okay, yeah, I found it. So I'll just go ahead with this. So these are new figures. I don't believe we've shown them. We didn't show them last time, but we created them based on feedback from last time. So this plot has year on the x-axis and then 2 y-axes. So in brown on the left y-axis is % of all the edible seaweed harvested. It's the % that was bulk kelp. So it's depicting statewide bulk kelp harvested as edible seaweed from 2002 to 2020, which is all the years we have records of it. And it is just folks that harvested bulk kelp. So brown bars are % bulk kelp, and that corresponds to the left brown axis. And the right y-axis is the number of bulk kelp harvesters each year, and that corresponds to the black line. So make sure you're comparing black to black and brown to brown, because it's a little bit easy to get mixed up on this one. So a few things to point out here. This is for all the whole state where there's bulk kelp, and we'll divide it up by counties in the next few slides. And just to point out a few features here. So in 2003, nobody harvested bulk kelp, so there's 0 harvesters and there's no bar. And in 2020, there was 1 bulk kelp harvester. And it looks like there's no bar because that person harvested very, very little, and the bar is just too small to see in the graph. Okay, I'll move on to Del Norte and Humboldt counties. So same type of plots.
Hey, Gina, could I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Just because I know these next slides are going to build, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding the first slide correctly. So could we bump back to that first slide?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So I'm just trying to understand why we're presenting a percentage of overall edible seaweed harvest and what that's supposed to tell us. I'm not sure how it relates to what we're talking about, so I just want to ask why you guys chose that metric.
So we were trying to just trying to determine like how much harvesters are relying on bulk kelp. So if we did change regulations or close certain counties, you know, are they harvesting, like, is all their harvest bulk kelp? So if we close harvest down, they're not going to have, like, they're going to go out of business because they were really relying on it. So that's what we're trying to portray here. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. It helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we've been talking about this so much internally that I forgot to like take a step back and re-explain some of it. So thank you. So on the left, upper left here, we have Del Norte County. So let me find my notes. So for Del Norte County, starting in about 2012, the proportion of edible seaweed harvest that was bulk kelp was consistently 25% or greater, with the exception of 2020 when there was none taken. And if you compare that to Humboldt County, you will see that there's much, much less reliance on bulk kelp in Humboldt County. So just 3 years it was taken, and it wasn't nearly as much as we're seeing in Del Norte. And now we're showing you both Sonoma and Mendocino counties combined, because this is the area where we have the a lot of those remote sensing analyses done. So where Meredith presented her data, it was just these 2 counties. So we've combined them here. So we see a maximum of about 22% harvest in 2002, which was quite a while ago. And then after 2014, which is that crash, that big decline that we have been talking about, harvest was a maximum of 7% in 2015 and then 0 harvest in 2019. And I think there's like a very small percent in 2020 that 1%, you just can't see the bar. So that gives you kind of a picture of in those areas where the science has shown there's that big decline, kind of like the history of how bull kelp was harvested and then up until the decline and then how it's been after the decline. So there you have it. I'll just leave it at that and let people interpret it from there. And let's see what we have next. So this is kind of a more direct comparison of proportion of bull kelp harvested in Sonoma and Mendocino's counties combined. So we've split this up. These are like pie charts, but instead of a pie, we've used, I don't know, a brownie square, where the colors here are representing a proportion of bull kelp in brown and everything else in gray. So this is showing you the proportion of bull kelp harvested in the 7 years prior to that big decline in 2014. So that's 2017 through 2013. Bull kelp was 10.7% of harvest combined in all those years. And then on the right, we're showing you this 7 years after, or including 2014 and forward. So after the big decline. And bull kelp was 3.4% of edible seaweed harvest. So we're trying to see, like, before there was this decline, how much did people rely on bull kelp for edible seaweed harvest? And then how has that changed after the decline? And we will note that in the 7 years prior, there were 11 harvesters, and in the 7 years after, there were 8 harvesters. So it gives you an idea of how many folks are using bull kelp before and after the decline. I think that's the last of our, nope, one more. So this is showing those two counties over time, so excuse me, similarly to before. So we have percent bull kelp harvest in the brown bars, which corresponds to the brown left axis, and the number of harvesters with the line corresponding to the right axis. So in Mendocino County here on the left, there were a few years where bull kelp represented around 20% of harvest. And since the crash, it has ranged from 0% in 2019 to 8% in 2015. And versus Sonoma County, there's really not been that much bull kelp harvested ever, just 3 years where it was, I don't know, 10% and lower, and no harvest in the last 3 years. And that, I believe, is our last slide showing you harvest information. So we'll take a minute for questions.
Thank you, Gina. And I did want to just point out, as Gina stated before she started talking about the bull kelp harvest, is that we this is just considering those harvesters who have historically harvested bull kelp. We do have some harvesters who do not target bull kelp, so their harvest was not considered in this in the data set that she was presenting. So
yeah. I can't see hands, so if you could take the hands, Rebecca, that'd be great.
Yeah, I will. Can you? I saw one hand and now it went away. And who is it? Oh, it's James. Sorry, James. Would you like to?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to, looking at this data and chart, there was several years, speaking with like Andrew and Terry down in Mendocino, that during the years when there was like very, very little bull kelp, like 2019 was the latest one. And that was also the same up in Del Norte, that there was almost none that year. It's like, every so often it crashes down to that level, even up where I am. And but anyway, on those years, we just don't harvest any because it's just not, it doesn't make sense to take what small amount there is. Better to leave it. So that's part of why what you're looking at there in 2017 and 2019 is, and that probably in general the lower amounts is that there was less to harvest, so people restrain themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And I'm trying to see if we have any other hands up. Unfortunately, I don't see all the meeting participants when you're sharing a screen.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
Oh, great.
Okay. And I'm just wondering about it's such a complicated metric because the amount harvested of this species relative, because there's so many species harvested. Like, is there like shifting between species? Maybe a better question for James, actually, between the species that you harvest, so that in some years, would you harvest, say, more of a different species if there wasn't much, bull kelp, or like all the other populations of all the other species, we don't know what's happening to them in this time.
I'm sorry. You go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Provide my perspective.
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, overall, we try to harvest, having mail order businesses, most of us, we mostly harvest according to our projected sales for the year ahead. And we have, because we're niche markets, it's not like there's a place to go sell seaweed. We develop those markets, and we have regular customers that we've had for years or decades, and we try to keep them supplied, because if we don't, they'll go somewhere else. So it's not like there's just a place to go sell seaweed, and if you can't get this one, you go get another one.
Right.
In some years when there's no bull kelp, then perhaps we do maybe spend a little more time doing other ones, but it's like you don't want to sell, you want to harvest more than you can sell. It doesn't make sense. Right. So when I see 3 years of bull kelp in a booming year, then I expect a crash. So I harvest for 2 years, which I did in 2019, expecting the crash in 2020. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of, yes. It says I think you said you harvest about as much as you can evenly because you have an expectation of what your customers want.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not like, like if you're harvesting the same tonnage every year, switching between species, you're harvesting the selection that you know you can sell. I understand.
Correct. Yeah, it's not like a lot of other fisheries where there's not much of these kind, we'll go after those kind.
Right. That's the question. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that we did not look at the other species and consider if there was a harvest shift. So we did not consider that. That is something when we move on to the edible seaweed working group. Definitely we'll need to be considering that during that time. But for now, we did talk about it, but we didn't look into it. So it looks like Cindy has her hand up.
Yeah, there.
No.
Oh,
I think
hello?
you muted. There we go. Now
can you hear me now? Okay,
yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to follow up on Janet's question. Just maybe for the group, this might help, at least it helped in my head, is to look at that particular metric as it's an economic metric. It's not a biological metric. Because that's why I was having trouble figuring why we were looking at it. But it does tell us a lot about the economics the potential economic impacts to the fish, to the harvesters, based on any set of regulations that would change that amount of harvest. So when I look at that percentage up in Del Norte County with two folks up there consistently since 2016, and then like the big year was 3 folks in 2015, you know, and it's a significant portion of everything that was taken out under edible seaweed licenses in that area. You know, it tells me that, you know, there could be a pretty significant economic impact to those 2 harvesters if that harvest went completely away. So anyway, it just helped me in my head if I switched it from a biological metric to an economic metric, and then it kind of fit in with the whole story a little bit better. I don't know if that helped or hurted, but there you have it.
It's kind of helps, but it a little bit, it just makes me want to go to do all seaweeds, you know, are they worth the same amount per pound? Of course not. And I don't know this stuff, right? This is like for the people who have the businesses, right? Like whether, you know, they weigh differently in or the same, or you can even compare different species in this way, percentage of weight.
Yeah,
really comes down to markets and things that I stay out of.
Yeah. Well, I think James really gave us some insight in that, you know, he spoke about his business as a niche business, right? Like he specifically has developed a market for people who are potentially specifically interested in Nereo and bull kelp, right? And so there are other people who sell other seaweeds, but like he's put a lot of his time and effort over the decades in cultivating this around a particular species, right? And so I think the niche market thing also helped me in my head kind of understand that, yeah, you can sell all kinds of seaweed, but his particular business has focused on, you know, one species more than others. It seems to be, at least based on the data. And obviously he would know better than anyone. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So I am looking at the time. It's 1:07, and we have until 2 o'clock for this call. And we do have 2 harvester presentations that we want to start. But is there any other last minute comments? James, I do see you have your hand up. I'm not sure if it was before or not.
Oh, that was from before.
Okay, cool. If it's okay with everyone else, I would like for us to move on. So I believe the next on to our next agenda topic, which would be the harvester recommendations, and allow James time to discuss the recommendation document that he created with other harvester feedback. And again, James, I'm sorry we couldn't get to this topic on our last call, and I appreciate you being patient and allowing us to do that, to have time on this call. So would you like us to bring up your document, James?
Oh, I guess it's I guess you might as well. Sure.
Okay.
I'll be kind of breezing through it, hopefully.
Okay.
It's 12 pages long. So, but I think it'll be helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Rebecca, let me know if you want me to bring that up. Otherwise, I'll assume you're doing it.
Oh, okay. If you have it, you can bring it up. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, I have it open.
It's a Word document.
Yes. Does it begin with stakeholder presentation to the Bull Kelp Working Group?
Mm-hmm. That's it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let me know if you see it.
Yes. If you could just expand it, enlarge it. That's good.
Okay.
At least that's good for me. It's
were folks provided this in an email so they can pull it up themselves? Okay.
Yes. Thank you for the reminder. Yes, this was provided a couple of times. So the most recent, we most recently provided it on Friday. So if you want to open up the Friday email I sent to you, you will have it in that email. If that's easier for you. So So James, just let us know when you want us to like move on through the document.
Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, I was just gonna just try to get a general sense. Did anyone read it in the group here? Did how many of you have got a chance to check it out?
I read it.
Okay. Well, I'll try to just go over the most important stuff here, because of the time here. And I've compiled this over the last few months with a lot of other people's help and input. And so basically, as far as the regulations, I don't really need to go over that. I think we've covered that well enough. The general information here, I don't think I need to repeat that. But I did want to go over the history of the 300 series administrative kelp beds, which is just down a little bit further on the presentation. And so the
Where is it?
Let's see, general information,
Down.
and then regulations, and then history.
Tell me if I.
That's not where did it go?
Does this look like your document?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's just always a little challenging.
Maybe it's jumping past it somehow.
I'm trying to look for it too.
Let me go back to the top. So general info, current levels of commercial harvest.
Huh.
Oh, can you wait one sec? Maybe if you go up a little bit. So pause for there. Thank you. He talks about the northern ones.
So this is an older version that got put up here.
I'm sorry.
Oh gosh.
So, well, you know what? I'll just talk.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
In the meantime, I'll see if I have that most recent version.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Because I submitted an earlier version as a draft for you all to look at at Fish and Wildlife, and then I submitted the final later.
All right, I'll look for that.
In the meantime, I'll just talk about the history of the 300 series beds. And back in, according to the department's 2003 annual status of the fisheries report, in 1996, the commission adopted 300 series numbering system for all the kelp beds north of San Francisco, and set up a leasing program for, that's when they also set up the leasing program south of there for Central and Southern California for giant kelp. Before that, you could pretty much just harvest anything anywhere for any purpose. It's kind of how I understood it. So that's when they developed the system. But when with the advent of Abalone International up in Crescent City, and probably in response to concern from people from the other industries like abalone and urchins, the commission acted in a precautionary manner in 1996 by closing kelp beds 303 through 307 and limiting the harvest in the 3 remaining open kelp beds to a maximum of 15% of the biomass. And then in 2001, they adopted a new suite of regulations. That's when they closed 301, 302, 310, 311, and restricted the harvest from April 1 through July 31 down there within the Monterey Bay Sanctuary. So basically, all together, along with the marine protected area, well, that came later, but back in 2003, 2001, right in that range, that they closed those beds and created what they called a de facto bull kelp reserve along much of the Northern California coastline in response to concerns, I assume, from urchin and abalone fisheries. And because they're concerned about other aquaculture operations coming along and using up all the kelp. That's kind of how I understand it. So So basically, and that's where we're at now. We only have 3 open kelp beds in the 300 series.
James, if I can, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
apologize for interrupting, but I think I did find your most recent document.
Okay.
So do you see that up? It's 32521. Do you see that on your screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, is that correct? Well, it's
That
not.
should be, yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay. I can move
So,
around now whenever you want me to, so.
okay. Well, basically, for the edible harvest, regulations for edible harvest, it's like up to 2 tons. There's no spatial limits on where a person holding an edible harvest permit can harvest, just so you know. And then we can't harvest in the MPAs or San Francisco Bay or Tamales Bay. And so the harvest under a kelp permit is basically they can harvest in any open bed, or they can leasable beds. It's a little different. There's no real limit, and there's no real difference in reporting at this point between giant and bull kelp. So when we're looking at the commercial harvest of bull kelp south of Point Montara, we're basically talking about one major harvest operation, Monterey Abalone Company. That's Art Seavey's company, and he's been cultivating red abalone in cages under the Monterey's municipal wharf since 1990. And they use the bull kelp, especially in the winter time when the giant kelp is starting to decline because of the dark months. The giant kelp kind of tends to wear off from the wave action, but there's still a lot of bull kelp in a lot of his areas that he can harvest and fill in for the times when the giant kelp is diminished, I guess you would say. So they're going out with a boat and cutting the whole kelp plants and taking them in with to feed to their abalone. They eat the whole thing. They harvest 1,800 to 3,600 pounds of kelp per trip for a weekly total of 6,000 to 12,000 pounds when there's enough. And they also harvest a lot of drift kelp, and they're basically harvest by and large mostly giant kelp, but they also they supplement that with bull kelp during those winter months and early spring months. So then there's the cultured abalone farm. That's Doug, and he doesn't really go after bull kelp. He may have some small, tiny amounts of incidental take, but it doesn't even count. So I won't even go on into that. He's using a kelp cutter for harvesting his giant kelp, and he basically avoids the bull kelp because it clogs up the cutter, and because he's not really allowed to take it anyway. So anyway, so he has no reportable harvest of bull kelp. So then we're looking at the edible harvest, and so basically, there's the north of Point Montara, there's been the only harvest is by edible harvest. And there's the edible harvesters have been harvesting that region for decades, and we're going to just briefly go over 3 of us and what we do. There's Andrew Donis, Pacific Wildcraft, and Terry DeSelke, Ocean Harvest, and they harvest in Mendocino. And I, Nature Spirit Herbs, harvest in Del Norte, Humboldt. Like I was saying earlier, we all have like entrepreneurial mail order businesses, and we have multiple value-added products and niche markets that we've developed over the decades. Andrews and Terry's and James's businesses depend on their ability to harvest these seaweeds year after year from their own harvest areas. So we practice sustainable methods that, our level of harvest is so small, it's relatively inconsequential, but nevertheless, we've developed harvest practices that have proven sustainable over the decades, and we try to educate new harvesters about these methods. When I go out, when Andrew goes out, we use a kayak or a Zodiac, and we harvest the bull kelp in May and June. So we're harvesting the overwintered plants. They're huge and much less work to process and dry. Terry harvests in July and August, getting the younger plants, and she's harvesting from shore with a hooked pole to get those and get them to where she can reach them and cut the fronds off. Basically, all of us basically cut the fronds maybe like 6 to 12 inches out from the bulb with scissors or knives, and the overall percentage of our harvest is, just from talking to everybody, it's always well under 15%. And that's assessed by visually, just by looking at the amount there. It's easy to see the area of canopy. So we harvest the kelp fronds, stuff them into sacks, paddle them ashore, carry them up the hill to drive them inland to wherever they're being dried, and they get hung up by hand to dry. And they dry down with a wet to dry ratio of about 12 to 1. And then we these dried, crispy, snackable kelp fronds, we trim them and sort them, package them, store them, and sell them in our mail order businesses year round. It's a significant amount of work to produce, say, just 1 pound of bull kelp. Of dried fronds. What it means is we hire a lot of help, and it provides a lot of employment for people to produce it. Current levels of commercial harvests. So basically, Art Seavey is the #1 harvester. He harvests together more than everybody else put together for his abalone. His harvest has been between 10 and 26 tons per year over the last 5 years. And at the same time, the charts provided by the department show that the combined edible harvest of Nereocystis for human consumption has been between 4,000 and 8,000 pounds per year over the last 5 years. And so we're basically talking in north of Point Montara, what is that, 2 to 4 tons per year in the entire area. So if you were to look at the whole thing, the entire harvest in Northern California has ranged between 20 and 40 tons. I'm not saying Northern California, in all of California, 2016 to 2020 has been 20 to 40 tons a year. So if you look at, like, just to try to get some kind of sense, and the lack of canopy to biomass data, I tried to use some of the data that was available, and basically used the let's see. So if we just say 40 tons, just use the maximum, that's like you can safely say that's a fraction of 1% of the average total tonnage of biomass, of Nereocystis biomass growing in state waters during that last 5 years, say 2016 to 2020, despite the recent declines. So according to the 2003 bull kelp status report, there's historically been about 6.5 square miles of bull kelp canopy north of Point Montara, and slightly less than that south of Point Montara total. But just let's talk about north of Montara. That's 4,160 acres, 6.5 square miles. The range of bull kelp biomass per acre of canopy ranges 25 to 250 tons. So let's just say 25 tons. So that times 4,160 acres would be 104,000 tons. So if you took that and said 95% loss, then we're looking at 5,200 tons. So 40 tons, which is the top possible, highest ever harvest of bull kelp in the state. That's 1/130th of that 5,200 tons. Now that's if you include Monterey Aballone's data. So if you just look at north of Point Montara, we're looking at 4,000 to 8,000 pounds. That's 4 tons out of 5,200 tons. So that's what we're looking at. That's the level of harvest we're talking about. 4 tons, like however you want to construe it, that's a pretty small percentage of the total biomass. And so, and then along similar lines, if you were to just look at the tonnage harvested from Mendocino and Sonoma, we're talking 1 to 2 tons. And we don't have data for the total tonnage, what is there, but I would feel safe in saying it also represents a tiny fraction of 1% of what it is, even considering the 95% decline that's going on down there, or that has happened down there. So I took the total amount of canopy data according to, there was a 2003 survey, which also they said matched a 1912 survey. And so that's the best I had. And then took a look at, and just took the lowest possible amount that you could say of biomass per acre of canopy, took that amount and took 5% of that to give a 95% decline. And that's the number I came up with, 5,200 tons. So that's not hard science, but it's at least something to give us some kind of idea of the scale of the harvest as it exists today. It would be difficult to argue that this level of harvest could have a measurable impact or needs to be further limited. So just looking at the nearest cystis biology, basically the bull kelps kind of start growing up from the gametophytes in the spring. When they reach the surface, they start growing out their fronds pretty fast, which is usually sometime in the summer. They reach maximum biomass and size. Well, they reach maximum biomass in September, October, and maximum reproduction at that time. And then in the going into the dark months, they start to weaken and stop growing so much. They start to wash away with the storms. And the fronds tatter off faster than they're growing. So they're in decline biomass during the winter. And up in Mendocino, Sonoma, up into Del Norte, there's also a spring burst of growth that happens with the returning light. Any overwintered plants have a tendency to start growing and churning out sori again and doing reproduction. And then in the summer, with some time and, so the overwintered plants, that's what Andrew and I harvest in May and June. And then by July, with the warm water temperatures, all the overwintered plants die. They drop their fronds, they turn yellow, and they die. That's like the end of the game. So basically, as each frond is growing out from the bulb, it matures. At first it's vegetative, and then after it's grown out to 3 to 6 feet out from the bulb, because they elongate at the base and tatter off at the tips. They develop reproductive sori that kind of eventually detach and go off into the ocean, and the reproductive aspect. Beyond that, after the sori are released, what's left is just these tattered shreds that basically slough off and feed that becomes detritus for all the things that eat that. And that just keeps going until the plant dies, however long it lasts until it dies. So anyway, I've talked about how, we talked about the declines. We talk about the boom and bust cycles. After 3 to 4 years of abundant overwintered Nereocystis, there's a strong tendency for a bust year. And probably because of reduced gametophyte survival in the shade of a dense overhead sporophyte canopy. This has been observed by Foreman. It's thought that Nereocystis gametophytes can live for up to 3 years. So if you get 3 years of abundant overwintered bull kelp, there's a strong tendency to get a bust year. And that's, in my opinion, what we're seeing happening with this fairly regular pattern of boom and bust in like 3 to 5 year cycles or whatever. 1 to 2 years up, 1 to 2 years down, 1 to 3 years up, somewhere in there. So anyway, and so I've seen a bust cycle 3 times in the last, maybe 4 in the last 20 years. And the last time this happened was in 2019. In 2020, up in my area, I've seen, fairly abundant, I'd say, I don't know, a significant resurgence in the bull kelp. And I'm looking forward to harvesting it this coming May. So let's see. I talked during the first group meeting about potential harvest impacts, but I mean, the only real study that showed that was on the ground harvest impact study was the Foreman study done in north of Vancouver Island, British Columbia in 1984. And those folks went and clear cut 100-meter square areas for 3 years in a row and measured the regrowth compared to control areas. And with 3 more years, I believe, of follow-up, and there was no difference at all in the harvested compared to unharvested areas, 100-meter area clear-cut areas. Now, keep in mind, that's in, good ocean conditions, abundant bull kelp, large beds, but it just does give you some kind of a sense of the reproductive capability of bull kelp when the conditions are right. So it would, obviously, we're not talking about the same place or, we're in a different area in Northern California, but that study would very strongly suggest that selective harvesting of 15% of the biomass or less is going to have a minimal effect on the recruitment. So really what we're really, in my opinion, what the real focus isn't about the effect of bull kelp harvest on recruitment, because it seems pretty obvious that it's minimal at anywhere near the kind of levels we're doing. But how much does it affect the production of, or the habitat and production of detritus for all the other marine species that live on that depend on it or that use it? So that's why we think that a 15% limit is quite adequate in protecting not only the bull kelp resource, but all the habitat and food production for other species. So anyway, trying to be brief here. So we're saying basically we think that the current regs for the bull kelp are sufficient as they are. So let's see. Well, I had another whole part of our presentation here that was talking about moving toward looking at how to work with the regs in the future to make it more user-friendly for smaller scale harvesters. For someone who wants to harvest more than 2 tons, an edible harvester that wants to harvest more than 2 tons per year, currently we would have to lease out an entire administrative kelp bed in order to harvest 3 tons, for example. And so perhaps it would be, wise to start taking a look at how we could make it so that there could be a little more leeway for small scale harvesters to harvest a little more without having to harvest an entire, lease out an entire kelp bed. But I think that's a topic for a conversation after we have some more data on what's actually going on out there. So I'll kind of hold off on that. But we have a lot of suggestions along those lines. We have a lot of suggestions as far as how to clean up the regs, a lot of things like that. But I don't think this is the time to discuss that right now. So I think I'll just open this up for questions.
Thank you, James, for providing that. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can see all the participants here. Okay. It looks like Cindy has her hand raised.
Sure. I just want to thank James and Doug and all the other harvesters for taking the time to put that all down in writing. It just is incredibly useful in being really grounded in what's happening, on day to day and on the ground and how they run their businesses. So I just wanted to express my gratitude for taking the time to do that. I know that it took some time to put that all in one place, so thank you. I just wanted to maybe kind of maybe kick off the discussion for the rest of our half an hour and maybe bump up a little bit of level and talk about, kind of bump us back to where we are with the proposed regulation or the proposed regulation changes, and a little bit of thinking about from Pew about how we could move forward, or just a little bit about how we're thinking about these things. So
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Cindy, if I can interrupt. We do still have one more agenda topic, and because Doug wanted to present as well. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget that as well, and give him some time. So
sure, I'm happy to
already
wait.
know that, but I just in case, I just wanted to let you know that. But
I'm happy. Excuse me, I'm happy to wait until Doug presents.
Okay. But did you have any specific topics for James or comments for James?
No, I just wanted to bring us back to kind of like where we are right now with the regulations and kind of how all this data fits together and next steps. But if there's more information, let's have that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you for that. So I guess I did want to clarify just a couple of points on James's presentation before we move on to Doug's presentation. So I did want to mention that just a couple of things. So if bull kelp harvest, currently if bull kelp harvest is harvested under the kelp logs, there is no differentiation in those logs between giant and bull kelp. So it's all just kelp. So, the department does not know specifically what that harvest, whether it's giant or bull kelp, unless folks provide that to us, but that's not on the logs. So that's one thing when we move into our upcoming meetings, we talk about harvest reports. That's one thing that we're proposing, is to have that kind of differentiation. The edible seaweed harvest logs, that's where we receive that data that Gina provided earlier, because on the edible seaweed harvest logs, it's reported by the type of algae or the algae species. And then I also just wanted to mention that the 15% limit that you mentioned, James, so that's pertaining to those lease-only beds if they're leased. So currently, there isn't. Yeah, I know it's, part of what we're doing is cleaning up our regulations for clarity, right? So yeah, that is just pertaining to those beds that are leased in the North Coast. So I just wanted to clarify that. And yeah, now, Doug, are you ready to discuss your proposal? You're on.
Hi there. Hold on, just taking myself off mute.
Okay. Do you want us to bring it up for you, Doug?
No, it's all right. I mean, it's just a page. You can if you want. It's and I'm not gonna read it. And I'll be very brief here. I think that something that I think we can look at this process as, one of the fruits and silver linings that's been borne out by us coming through this is a realization that we are all very much on the same page. We do want data-driven management, right? And there was an interesting, to me, comment made by Meredith earlier in today's talk, where she talked about how it's unique that we have these abilities to use Landsat data, drone flyover, this wavelength characteristic to make stock assessments. And it brings me back to a comment that's been made repeatedly by Craig Schumann in particular in a couple of the MRC meetings, where we talk about, be careful what we wish for with regional management and the potential cost and expense of regional management for a resource. But there's no other resource under the purview of the department that has the ability to have a nimble and responsive management program like Kelp does because of this Landsat tool that we're developing in the toolkit. And what the technology and the details that are fleshing out this understanding and the model and the predictions of kelp productivity in the nearshore environment, we've put more effort into sharpening the resolution of this understanding through this process, and that's a positive thing for every possible party that's interested in the long-term conservation of kelp. So we have the ability to. You can't do this with lobster. You can't do this with squid. You can't do this with sardines. You can't just do a flyover 4 times a year and get an accurate assessment of how much there is. But what do you do with that once you know how much there is? And that's kind of the underpinning of this comment that I'm trying to make in this stakeholder counter and response. And I was so thrilled to see that Gina and Meredith have put meat on those bones where we are trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? I mean, what is the natural interest rate that we can take sustainably off of this endowment? What are we taking off of it, and what can we afford to take off of it so that management strategy and that Landsat flyover stock assessment can be made as efficient? Because realistically, we could be having real-time decisions. This year you can harvest this many tons. This year you can harvest this many tons. It's wild, and it's spectacular, and what it holds is a potential for resource management. But until that sort of connection is made, it's very difficult to go through and say. But the range that was provided earlier for giant kelp, admitted, with the appropriate caveat that that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Nerio. But I can tell you from my own experience on the water, and I bet James could, endorse this as well. That 2 to 8 kilogram per meter squared, that's fair. It depends on what you're calling canopy. How deep are we talking? A foot, or just like the stuff that's just floating on the surface? But biomass of canopy blades of giant kelp and those big 2 to 6 foot long blades of Nerio that are floating on 2 to 8 kilograms per meter squared, that's fair. And I saw in the chat notes during James's comment that there was where is this 25 tons per acre number coming from? It fleshes out 2 to 8 kilograms per meter squared works out to be about 8 to 32,000 kilograms, 8 to 32 tons of canopy biomass per acre. Right, so this gives us a range. So if we're talking 8 to 32,000 kilograms per acre, what's the acceptable take for an acre? What's the acceptable take for the amount that that we're talking about harvesting. And when we're talking about this North Coast harvest, 2-3 harvesters taking a couple of 1,000 pounds. Well, I have to respectfully disagree with the comment that Cindy made earlier, where she said every single spore is precious and has to be conserved. I don't think that's an accurate and real world representation of the way that a dynamic living resource works. James has made a comment in an earlier working group meeting about the amount of loss of, spore producing blades that we likely see on a year-to-year basis just from boat propellers flying through a kelp bed. The natural ebb and flow and use and loss of waves. This all contributes to loss of some kelp blades, and in some cases regeneration of kelp blades and regeneration of sori tissue and reproductive capacity and reproductive potential. So with kelp harvesting methods that are sustainable by design, as Andrew and James practice, not clear cutting, not whole kelp harvesting in these Mendocino, Sonoma del Norte, Humboldt counties, you have the capacity to have a little bit of both. So what are we talking about? 1%, 1/10 of a percent, 1,000th of a percent? But the closure that the department is proposing, where we close it down, you are making an assertion that you are expecting that closure will result in a significant increase in recruitment capacity or recruitment potential. And I don't see that case has been substantively made. I don't see that the case that we would expect, if you can make a fair case that we would expect to see based on the removal of this amount of harvested product, an increase in recruitment, then I mean, no one is denying, no stakeholder is denying that the kelp resource is under duress, that the combination of stressors that has been placed on this resource are generational in nature, and provide a very unique set of circumstances, which has prevented the normal boom bust cycle from having its recovery back into boom. But we also discussed today how, based on what we see in these 30-year data sets, the main drivers are the environmental drivers. That the purple hinge, the purple urchin biological driver has a, based on what we've seen today in our working group, has a enhancing effect, but that the primary drivers, as discussed, are the environmental drivers. And in 2000, and for those of us who spend time on the water, the prolonged marine heat wave has had a profound effect, not just on seaweed, but on total ocean productivity, total across the board, Northern California and Southern California. And this year has been profoundly different. It has been the windiest year that we've had in the last 10 to 12 years. It is the coldest water that we've had in the last 10 to 12 years. In Southern California with giant kelp, we have the best quality kelp, the fastest growing kelp that I've seen in a long time. In light of those comments, a 3 to 5 year prohibition of a couple of harvesters is, in our mind, a public relations exercise. It is a response to the fact that despite all of the things that we've talked about in these working groups, there remains a messaging problem where in the public discourse, harvesting has somehow become the cause of it instead of the marine heat wave. And during the break, I took the time to read the Sinkyone Wilderness Council proposal. And among their listed impacts to the current status of the kelp resource, commercial harvesting is listed as the #1 impact. So what we have here is a proposal which puts the addressing of the public opinion before the need to see a difference in actual recruitment and recovery. Will the removal of a couple of harvesters who have developed over many years a niche business with a very specific product, will the removal of that very insignificant amount of biomass, will that result in an increase in recruitment, or will that not justify the loss of eyes on the water and stewardship that Andrew and James and the other small, local, off the shore, kelp with a hook scale harvesters, not the boogeyman of the giant industrial commercial harvest that so many times the kelp harvesting regulations have been written to preclude, but small cottage sustainability first harvesters? Do we really feel that we're going to accomplish an actual conservation goal by removing those 4,000 pounds of kelp blades from the harvest? License revenue paying, royalty revenue paying stakeholders who are contributing to the economic base of the department, to the economic base through jobs and sales of product through their communities. Do we really expect that the removal of those will justify the loss of the other? I do not. Our counter proposal is, yes, it acknowledges that the resource is under duress. 1 year continued hiatus of, the kelp bed harvesting leases, of which there are none that I know of, and I don't know, Rebecca, when you have last received a North Coast kelp bed lease proposal, but I doubt there have been many. Continued hiatus on that. And let's say no new commercial harvesters. We can be in favor of that. But the existing harvesters, at the scale that they are harvesting, there's very little in my mind and across the stakeholder discussion group that justifies removing that at the scale that they are operating from the current level of kelp resource utilization. The much more condensed version of that is available on that paper. You're welcome to read it. It was shared as hopeful a catalyst for positive discussion. And I'll wrap it up, and hopefully we can have a couple minutes of positive discussion.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. I did want to ask, though, if you could clarify when you were talking about allowing the current harvesters harvest for a there is a harvest limit of 2 tons wet weight per year, whether or not they harvest that amount or not. So, and you didn't mention limits or anything like that, but I just wanted to clarify that you were just discussing the current harvesters in the North Coast, I believe, right? Well, I had
current harvesters within the North Coast.
Okay, thanks. So it looks like Cindy may have her hand up.
Yeah, so first I just wanted to start by really agreeing strongly with Doug on a few points. I do think we sit on the precipice of opportunity to really think about kelp harvest holistically, and also to prioritize small scale operators with a significant cleanup of the regs. And I think that is going to be done in parallel with the fishery management plan, and kind of be at the back end of the fisheries management plan, as it should be, because we're going to have most of the data aggregated through that process. So I do think there's an incredible opportunity to continue this relationship with the harvesters and come up at the end, in however many years it takes, with something that really prioritizes small scale operators, and which is to speak to that boogeyman that everyone thinks about, and really prioritize them, especially on the North Coast for bull kelp. I also want to really strongly agree about, this is just a crazy species to manage, given where the technology is right now. There's exactly what Doug said. There is nothing that we harvest that I can think of that we could actually manage in close to real time the way that we can potentially with kelp. So I think that's an incredible opportunity that we should continue to figure out how to get resourced properly. And I think there's a way to do that without doing what Doug said, which is the be careful what you wish for, creating this really complex management system that isn't needed, especially given the number of operators. So I also want to kind of go to a general statement about how Pew is thinking about this currently. There is real and tangible biological reasons, not PR reasons, to have zero harvest in areas that have had sustained catastrophic loss. You can think of any species that humans harvest around the world, and if there was an associated loss, I think it would be hard pressed to find a place that allowed any harvest, even you know, a small infinitesimal percentage of that species. And so I think there is real data to support the department's biological data to support the department's proposal in Mendocino and Sonoma County, and also in Marin to guard against potential shifting of effort. So, and secondly, I think that we do have data that really shows that what's going on in other counties like Del Norte and Humboldt do support current levels of harvest. So just to kind of tie it up, well, one more thing. And I also believe that, you know, this idea of a hiatus for leases, I think it sends the wrong message. And I really, again, want to put on the table closing the leases for those 3 beds that are open, because I think it sets us up better for the opportunity to change the whole structure of how the administrative kelp beds are leased. Because I don't think there should be single leases for these giant beds, especially if we're prioritizing small scale operators. You know, Doug's harvest plan is really comprehensive, but it's short and to the point. It's not 20 pages long. You can do a harvest plan that provides an incredible amount of information that doesn't take, you know, a year and thousands of dollars to prepare, that can really give the department the information that they need to manage kelp across the state. And so, you know, I think we really should think about closing those lease beds for now, until we come up with a comprehensive overhaul of what it may look like in the future. And I just want to encourage us all to think about what leasing a bed looks like now doesn't need to be what leasing a bed looks like in the future. I envision, you know, multiple small scale operators sharing the lease of the bed, and then that amount coming out of that bed being directly tied to the status of the resource in that bed, right? So we're not making things up. We're looking at a spatial area, how much biomass is in that area, and then tying the take directly to that. So we really support closing Mendocino and Sonoma and Marin. We would also like it to be on the table to not just do an administrative, but to actually go through and change the one word in the regulations that said those lease beds are closed for now. And then we would hope to be part of a really robust discussion about how to overhaul the system to prioritize small scale harvesters, tie all take to the status of the resource, not just via a harvest plan or not with a cutout for edible seaweed harvesters. One way you take kelp, and this is how you do it, and we could come up with that together. So I'll stop there.
Cindy, I think your comments are nice, but over and over again, the commercial users have seen it not play out that way. When you close first and restructure second, like when the North Coast beds were initially created, they were closed on a precautionary basis, and then many of those years of giant boom cycles came and went through those closed beds. And never once did we say, hey, look at this opportunity of all this kelp here. Let's look and see if those bed closures were overly prescripted or overly precautionary. Close first, chat about it later. Once it's closed, it takes a monumental Sisyphean effort to get them to even be on the table for discussion for opening it again. So while I appreciate that there is an opportunity to go through and do a large scale systemic rehashing of the way that the kelp harvesting and all these weird distinctions that we have, which kelp here, edible there, can that all be completely torn down and rebuilt? Can we have regional management that takes advantage of things like Landsat flyovers? Yes, absolutely. But I'm going to dig in my heels time and time again on the close first, restructure second, because we've been burned by it so many times. It happens over and over again. It gets closed first on a prescriptive and precautionary way, and then it gets shelved. It gets put in the back burner, and that's it. There's only so many times it's going to come up for a reg review. So I'm not going to be that we've got to come away with a different roadmap to getting there. I think you and I can find an end point that we agree is a better, more efficient way to promote small businesses and sustainable harvest. You know, there's never going to be a 120-foot steel kelp harvester running the North Coast. It's not the reality of the economics of the resource. The distances between harbors are too far. The kelp is too it's too dynamic. It's not a reliable resource to exploit in the first place. The market prices aren't there. The conditions of the oceans are too rough. It's not going to happen. You don't need regulations to ban it. There is no giant kelp vacuum out on the horizon that we need to be worried of, that we need to close it in anticipation of in order to get to the in order to get to the desired endpoint of a creatively regulated resource that promotes small business, right? And I appreciate what you're saying. I'm taking issue with how you're proposing to get there. I think we need to plot a different route.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. You know, we can potentially agree to disagree on that one point. I don't disagree that harvesters are often burned by that approach. There is miles of data in lots of fisheries where exactly what you said happened. They said, oh, we'll just close it for now and then we'll talk about it. I think what's unique in this situation is a couple things. One, I think you will have NGO allies calling for this review to include prioritizing small operators, sending a clear signal to the market that may not even exist yet, that we're never going to be looking for large scale operators on the North Coast or potentially anywhere along the coast of California. And so I think the NGO advocates is unique, and also this FMP process, the train's on the tracks here. And I have never seen an FMP process that didn't result in some pretty significant regulation changes. And so I think that makes this a little bit unique, but I completely take your point about being burned. So we do still support that being in consideration. And I absolutely agree with you that we're trying to get to the same place you are, because we do feel like this is a resource that can continue to support small businesses across the coast and prioritize them across the coast when the oceanographic conditions and the status of the resource are at that level. And we have an ability to monitor this resource in a way that we don't otherwise. So I'm looking forward to additional discussions, and really thank again for the harvesters. You know, you guys aren't getting paid to be here, and I just want to really appreciate all the time and effort you guys have put in to share your perspectives. So thank you again.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Doug. It is 2:04, so it is time to end the meeting, but I really appreciate all the discussions that we've had today. I think this has been really helpful for all of us. As far as, you know, unfortunately, we don't have time for more discussion, but I don't see any other hands up. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to wrap it up and provide next steps. So, you know, we will meet again, and during our next meeting, we expect to discuss the proposal that we received from the Intertribal Sinking Wilderness Council. We'll also talk more about harvest methods. James will provide a lot of great detail, and we'll expand upon that. And kelp harvest logs, another thing that we mentioned today. So thank you all. We really do appreciate this discussion and the time that you all have taken 3 hours out of your day to meet and talk about this important topic, excuse me, end of the day. So thank you, and we will meet again soon, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. That was a great discussion.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.